I think if you're willing to keep your answers maybe a little bit shorter than 1.5 minutes, we have time for one more question. And this one asks, what are your lessons learned about the California Avenue trees and the early closing of Lytton Plaza before final approval? Who should be held accountable? And John, we'll let you go first this time. John Hackman.
Well, so far the answer seems to be hardly anybody. We have a city manager system where the council sets policy and the city manager runs the city, and naming individuals is not a function of the city council. However, the public has a sense that when I need a permit, when I cut down a tree, I need a permit. What happened here? That has to be addressed. Before we write a new policy, let's find out exactly what was the old policy and what happened. At the California Avenue tree issue, I did take time to redistribute the notebooks and talk to people so they could share their feelings about that. I think the accountability of California tree issue is an issue. I think that there's a bit of a deaf ear to the citizen input occasionally. Mr. Borak and Mr. Moss have been exemplar citizens in bringing forth many specific things to the fore in the city. I believe that the city was, I'm told, the city was informed in writing of the need for the notice period on Lytton Plaza and failed to respond. Sometimes comments are dropped off the table. I understand the letters to the council are dropped off the website fairly quickly. So your comments do not have the full merit. In the process department, we need to have packets out earlier, a week so they can meet newspaper deadlines, meetings closed earlier so that the discussions in City Hall can be in the next day's newspaper. Meetings shouldn't go past 10. We need to keep you informed and involved. And yes, people need to be accountable for their actions.
Gail Price.
Yes, it's clear the community feels, and rightly so, that this was an unmitigated disaster. I would say that part of the problem was that the existing policy and practices were not followed. The 14-day notice period, etc., was not followed as dictated. The city manager has taken responsibility, and I respect that. I think city council members certainly need to be involved in this discussion, again, being more policymakers than micromanagers. I would like to find out and make sure that this kind of a process, would never happen again. And I think, frankly, at this point, an equally important issue is what is the remediation plan to do the planting with mature trees as soon as possible, and the maintenance plan to ensure that those thrive as quickly as possible. This is not an event that just impacts the corridor of California Avenue. It is a community impact, and I think we need to make absolutely sure that something like this doesn't happen again. We pride ourselves in our tree protection plans, our concepts, environmental issues, the issues of canopy as an important element of urban design and an aesthetic community, and I think we need to absolutely ensure that those standards and outcomes are maintained. And I have belief that this will not happen again. I want to be very positive, and I want to see outcomes to assure that something like this wouldn't occur again.
Corey Levins.
Well, I guess what have I learned from this? I guess I've learned that in talking to so many Palo Altans in this process and hearing the undercurrent of dissatisfaction with their city government, I guess I've learned that there is some basis in reality for this. What have I learned as a corporate attorney dealing with businesses that need to do things right or they go out of business? I've learned that we haven't learned that lesson in Palo Alto because it's been 3 weeks, and I've heard somebody say we did it, but I have yet to hear the person that was actually responsible for this decision having any ramifications. And it doesn't have to be firing; it can be just a note in the file as to what's happened. But I've learned that basically there's a culture in Palo Alto that allows something like this to happen, and that it needs to change. And my hope is that we can correct this with a new council, with some new voices on the council that will not allow things like this to happen and have some accountability at the top, because that's where the accountability needs to be. If there's no accountability up here, then you will not find it down in the streets and the workers doing the work out in the community.
Nancy Shepard.
Thank you. This is once again one of my themes, to bring timely and complete information so that we know what we're advocating for and how we can defend our character going forward. Two things. One, at Lytton Plaza, this is a new experience, having a public-private partnership where people wanted to give their private dollars for a public betterment. And the situation was able to get intervened and get back on track with going through this process at City Hall, but it was a big surprise for a lot of people. Second, regarding the California Avenue trees, when I've been talking to people about this, and one of the cultures that I think most people were distressed at is the fact that when they did make calls to City Hall, the calls ricocheted around without any substantial information except, well, that was part of the work order, or didn't you know this was happening, or something like that. And nothing stuck. It was a 2-day process to remove everything. So I would like to see our values just at City Hall change so that we can be much more efficiently responding, so that things can get stopped and readdressed. The event, actually, I did go to the meeting the other night over at Escondido School, and Steve Embley took responsibility along with the head of the Public Works and along with the city manager, and I'm very grateful for that. But it did not go through the process of the ARB, the Architectural Review Board, and such. So there was, and they are going back. They've erased all of the changes they were making to the streets, and they are bringing in the trees, and the community got to vote for that, and so it was a good, effective civic engagement meeting.
Chris Gaither. And remember, we are running out of time, so if you can keep your answers a little shorter, we can get everybody in.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I live just a few blocks down from California Avenue on Grant, and of course, words that have already been expressed about what we feel about what occurred. My biggest question is, how could something like this happen? Every organization has a hierarchy. Even the President of the United States has a boss, known as his wife, the head of the household. And you wonder, how could this happen? How could it be that the City Council and the Public Works Director didn't know? And from what I've heard, there was emboldened at the bottom, wait 14 days, and so it makes me wonder, was this employee a long-term employee? If it's a long-term employee, you already know the process, and it is written somewhere. If you're a short-term employee and maybe you're just brought in, you're probably under the wings of your supervisor. So this goes back to policy and process, and it is our role as the council, or would be our role as a council, to help make sure that procedures are in place. A private organization would not run like this, and so we get back to pay and so forth. Hey, if you want private pay, then you must do as they do in the private sector. We must have policies and procedures. Thank you.
Brian Steen.
I've been appalled twice in this particular episode. I believe it was a Wednesday afternoon when the trees came down. When I heard about that, I could not believe it. We're sitting here 3 weeks later, and I'm appalled again that we still haven't heard a definitive answer from the city in terms of what has happened. As I've gone around the community knocking on doors at various different receptions, people have said many of the comments that you've just heard. How do we stop this from happening again? And why haven't we heard from the city? The Lytton Plaza question came up, and it was dealt with. It was corrected, and the project is underway. I really think the city now owes it to the community to stop this discussion by simply coming clean. I don't understand why that hasn't happened yet. It's not satisfactory for me to hear senior managers with the city saying, well, I'll take responsibility. We expect them to take responsibility. I think the city could very well end this controversy simply by coming clean, telling the truth, replanting the trees, and we'll get on with the rest of our lives.
Mark Weiss.
I have a friend I have a friend, Robert Syret, who's a retail clerk on California Avenue and an artist, and he coined a new acronym for this issue, and he said CAADA stands for California Avenue Abrupt Deforestation Association. And I had my own private Treegate thing that got me involved in this race, in that I produced a poster pro bono for the Fête de la Musique, which is a free music festival the city produced in June, and the city refused to print the poster because they thought it would violate copyright laws, and it went through like 5 levels of different offices, people commenting on it, and you know, they just never got it right, and they just didn't understand fair use or copyright law, even though Stanford has the top fair use to people in the country, and that's one of the things that want to get me get involved. I think there's room in all these issues, from high-speed rail to trees to the homeless, for the citizens to get involved. I love the fact that a group of citizens have been meeting on Sundays at the farmers market to talk about their interest in the trees and whether or not canopy covers it enough. And by the way, about Lytton Plaza, I find that far more disturbing than the California Avenue thing, and that I think it's the exact opposite of what Nancy says. I feel it's like the little guys subsidizing what the developers want.
Victor Frost?
Off with his head. The people of Palo Alto I talk to on a daily basis. They want the department head of Public Works gone. Send him to Arizona. Protocol and communication with all departments wasn't done. Besides, she scraped the homeless garden clean too without protocol. So, restructuring Public Works, one to save money, and one to get rid of them and appease the people of Palo Alto. They're very upset about this issue. I mean, they are gone. So, yes, they want a lynching mob, they want to hang them, but they can't find any oak trees anywhere. Oh.
Karen Holman?
This is a very unfortunate incident, and I think what we've seen here is that not only is the removal of all these trees very upsetting, but I think the level of upset is an indication of broader discontent too. And it is that the city staff, we have some wonderful city staff, and we also have the need for city council to instill in the city staff that they are the public servants and work for the public and in the public's best interest. And that doesn't always happen. I'm very encouraged by our new city manager. I think he has that ethic. There is a culture here in City Hall that he has to address, and the city council's responsibility is to make sure that that happens. There was a process that this was supposed to follow. It was identified in the Capital Improvement Program. It was to go to the Architectural Review Board, Planning Commission, and City Council for public review. None of that happened. That really isn't acceptable. I think another reason that the public is upset is because if a member of the public were to remove a protected tree, which these were not, but just by comparison, if the public were to remove a protected tree, they would get a $5,000 fine. So, you know, there is some kind of level playing field here. What's the consequence for this action? And I think that's a reasonable question to be asking. This kind of incident is both emotionally and financially expensive. Emotionally because people are very upset, and also financially because we're having now extra meetings to try to salve the wound.
Tim Gray?
The lesson is openness, and the council will need to work with Jim Keene in reinforcing that value of openness. I did run into the Public Works Director, and he was on his way to the somewhere in North Carolina or South Carolina to see the fall foliage, and I asked him if that was because he couldn't see it on California Avenue. But I really want to differentiate between blame and accountability, because I'm a champion of accountability, and I want to move forward with the lesson that we can learn. One lesson we learned was that the city said we couldn't put together a meeting, but there was a citizen who put together a meeting of which city management attended. So the citizens can do things much faster than the government. So I think if we insert a little more citizen participation, the city will have to run to catch up with the people. One practical measure would be for the council members, and I want to do this, is to go to every single key management person and know in detail the projects that are going on, because if that had happened, we wouldn't be talking about 63 downed trees. Thank you.
Leon?
I was quite saddened to see what happened on California Avenue. Clearly, the process wasn't followed, and that's the level of facts I think that we have right now. And I think, you know, it's great that Jim Keene is willing to step up and take responsibility, but the public, I believe, wants to know more in terms of how the process broke down. And what I would recommend is that the city auditor get involved and have a specific time frame to set out and document the events as to how they happened, so that the public can have a factual basis to look at how this occurred before we rush to judgment and try to assign blame to any particular individual.
Larry Klein?
Thank you. The question was lessons learned, and let's go through them. Lytton Plaza to me is an example of what we need to have more of, not the administrative glitch, but a public-private partnership to help our downtown, and I think that we're going to need to see more public-private partnerships. So I think the lesson learned there is that is going to help our downtown business area. Well, California Avenue, unmitigated disaster. You agree with many of the things that have been said before. I led the questioning of the city manager, and he is committed publicly at the meeting on Monday to come back in a few weeks with the answers to these questions. What are the ramifications, what punishments, whatever, to whoever it was responsible for these very serious mistakes? Two, I pointed out that all too often in human organizations, the person who's at the lowest level is the one who gets the blame, and that I wanted to make sure that in Jim's report to us, he acknowledges or examines whether there were supervisors at fault, and he has acknowledged that indeed as part of his report. Third, is there a culture in the Public Works Department that made it more likely that this was to have occurred than in some other departments? Lastly, there was a lack of communication in City Hall when citizens called in. I have proposed in the past, and it hasn't gone anywhere, that the city has adopted a 311 system. For those of you who are not familiar with it, 311 is used in many other cities around the country. It's a way for the citizens to be able to call in and get answers to their questions, not on an emergency basis. It's not 911, it's 311, and it's for information, and I think that maybe this has shown that it's time for us to do that.
And Dan Dyke will hear the last one on this.
Thank you. Regarding Lytton Plaza, we were fortunate in that it was a minor procedural issue missed by both the legal department and Parks and Rec department. There was no particular harm done. We were fortunate, but it does raise the issue of procedures. California Avenue was stunning. Top of my list is the performance audit of Public Works. It also raises the issue of outreach and how effective we have been or need to be with that, and the fact that with the recent forum on this, on tree selections, we're now finding that the original selection was probably not the most appropriate one due to excessive water uses for those particular trees. So all around there should have been a notion that when you dramatically affect the streetscape, it's not just the door front of your business or the block behind it. It affects the neighborhoods, it affects every one of us who drives by that area, and there needs to be particular attention paid to that, especially with outreach, and that did not happen. Clearly the community wants closure on this issue, and so we are expecting something of that nature from the city, and I hope that occurs quickly.